Many believe the greatest figures in biblical history possessed pristine bloodlines, born into privilege or prophetic destiny within the chosen nation. This is a profound historical misconception. You might think the lineage of Israel's greatest king required pure heritage. In reality, the most vital link was an impoverished, despised foreigner from a cursed nation. The ancient Moabites were fierce enemies of Israel, worshippers of Chemosh, and explicitly banned from the sacred assembly. Yet, one Moabite widow forever altered human history. She was not a queen, a prophetess, or an Israelite. She was a destitute widow from Moab with no status, facing a future entirely devoid of hope. Her husband was dead, her native land offered no security, and her path forward pointed only toward abject poverty. Yet, she made a truly unimaginable, defiant choice. She abandoned her ancestral gods, her people, and her past, choosing to follow her bitter mother-in-law into a hostile territory where she would be a marginalized outsider. What appeared to be a desperate, foolish journey into foreign lands was actually the quiet unfolding of an incredible divine destiny. Her name was simply Ruth. Through her remarkable faith, God meticulously orchestrated her redemption, placing this despised Moabite directly into the royal bloodline of Israel's greatest king and the ultimate Messiah. This extraordinary narrative unfolds during the era of the Judges. Archaeologists recognize this as the turbulent Iron Age transition, a chaotic period following Joshua's death. Without a monarch, Israel spiraled into violent cycles of idolatry, foreign oppression, and deliverance. Scripture bleakly notes that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Amidst this societal collapse, a devastating regional famine crippled the territory of Judah. Climate shifts severely impacted the agrarian settlements of the ancient Near Eastern highlands. Ironically, the crisis struck Bethlehem, a town whose very name translates to house of bread. The terraced fields that once produced abundant wheat and barley lay barren. Facing starvation, an Israelite man named Elimelech made a desperate calculation. Leaving the promised covenant land, he migrated his family eastward toward the fertile plains of Moab. Moab, located across the Dead Sea, worshipped the bloodthirsty god Chemosh. The Mesha Stellal confirms their long-standing violent border conflicts with the tribes of Israel. Despite the geopolitical hostility, Moab offered the agricultural stability that Judah lacked. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 young sons settled into this pagan territory. However, this geographical escape did not prevent tragedy. Shortly after arriving, Elimelech suddenly perished, leaving Naomi incredibly vulnerable within the patriarchal structures of the ancient world. In ancient Near Eastern societies, a woman's economic survival and physical protection were completely dependent on male relatives. Naomi's only hope rested upon her 2 remaining sons. Her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, eventually married local Moabite women named Ruth and Orpah. For approximately a decade, they maintained a fragile existence in this foreign land. Then, devastating grief struck Naomi a second time. Both of her adult sons died prematurely, completely shattering the family's lineage and extinguishing their primary source of income. Naomi was utterly bereft. She was a grieving mother stripped of her children, a widow without a husband, and an aging foreigner stranded without a supportive community. These 3 widows stood together, united by immense tragedy. They were entirely unprotected in an ancient agrarian society, where husbandless women frequently faced destitution and exploitation. Crushed by the agonizing weight of despair, Naomi felt completely abandoned by her God. She had fled famine, only to lose every relationship that gave life meaning. Eventually, news arrived via ancient trade routes that rain had returned to the Judean highlands. The Lord had provided food, ending the bitter famine in Bethlehem. With no rational reason to remain in Moab, Naomi decided to undertake the dangerous trek back to her homeland. Her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law initially followed her. Pausing along the dusty road, Naomi tearfully commanded them to turn back. She urged them to return to their maternal homes, praying for their future security. She graciously released them from all familial obligations. She begged them to find new Moabite husbands, knowing that following her meant embracing certain poverty in Israel. Both women wept bitterly. Orpah, realizing the harsh sociological realities of migrating as a foreigner, kissed Naomi goodbye and returned to her people and pagan deities. Orpah's decision was incredibly practical and culturally expected. She vanishes from the historical record, choosing the logical safety of her homeland over an uncertain, dangerous future. But Ruth shockingly refused to leave. The Hebrew text uses a word for clinging that denotes fierce, unbreakable covenant loyalty, normally reserved for profound marital devotion. Naomi pleaded with her to follow Orpah's sensible example. In response, Ruth delivered a breathtaking declaration of loyalty that remains one of history's most powerful vows. She boldly declared that Naomi's people would become her people, and Naomi's God would become her God. She promised to follow her mother-in-law, even unto death. This was a radical cultural defection. Ruth completely renounced her Moabite identity, her ancestral religion, and her safety, binding herself entirely to the God of Israel. Silenced by this astonishing display of steadfast loyalty, Naomi accepted her presence. The two impoverished widows continued their arduous journey upward toward the Judean mountain settlements. When they finally limped into Bethlehem, the entire village was shocked. The local women barely recognized the haggard, sorrowful figure as the once joyful woman they knew. Naomi bitterly rejected her own name, which meant pleasant. She demanded to be called Mara, meaning bitter, publicly declaring that the Almighty had brought her sheer ruin. She cried out that she had left the village full, but God had forcefully brought her back entirely empty. Her brutal honesty reflected a deeply shattered spirit. They arrived precisely at the beginning of the barley harvest. Archaeologically, this marks the critical springtime agricultural window, setting the stage for Ruth's desperate survival efforts. Facing immediate starvation, Ruth utilized a vital Israelite social welfare law. The ancient Torah mandated that landowners must leave the edges of their fields for the poor. Ruth sought permission to glean behind the exhausted harvesters. Guided by an unseen divine providence, she unknowingly walked into the vast agricultural estate of a wealthy landowner. This prominent man was Boaz, a close relative of Naomi's deceased husband. He was a respected patrician in Bethlehem, holding significant social and economic power in Judah. Arriving from the city, Boaz greeted his laborers with a blessing. Even in ordinary agricultural commerce, his deep faith and righteous character illuminated the dusty harvest fields. Scanning the bustling workers, Boaz immediately noticed an unfamiliar young woman gathering leftover grain. He questioned his field overseer about the identity of this diligent, unknown foreigner. The overseer explained she was the Moabite widow who returned with bitter Naomi. He noted her relentless work ethic, mentioning she had scarcely rested since early morning. Deeply moved by her renowned loyalty, Boaz approached Ruth. He broke cultural boundaries, speaking gently to a marginalized foreigner from a historically despised and hostile enemy nation. He firmly instructed her to remain exclusively in his fields, closely following his female workers. He explicitly ordered the young men not to harass or touch her. This provided unprecedented security. In ancient patriarchal societies, unprotected foreign women gleaning in open fields faced severe risks of exploitation and physical abuse from local agricultural laborers. He even granted her access to the workers' water jars. This was an astonishing privilege for an alien gleaner, reflecting his extraordinary generosity and protective, fatherly care. Overwhelmed by this unmerited grace, Ruth bowed face down in the dirt. She humbly questioned why a prominent Israelite would show such extraordinary favor to a Moabite foreigner. Boaz revealed that her fierce devotion to Naomi was well known. The entire village had heard how she abandoned her homeland to care for her grieving mother-in-law. He pronounced a profound blessing over her, praying that the God of Israel would fully reward the brave woman who sought refuge beneath his divine, protective wings. Ruth felt a powerful wave of reassurance. In the sweltering heat of the harvest, this honorable man's words provided a profound sense of divine favor and safety. Later, Boaz covertly instructed his reapers to deliberately pull out stalks from the bundled sheaves. He commanded them to leave extra grain specifically for Ruth to gather. By evening, Ruth had threshed nearly 30 pounds of premium barley. This was a staggering, miraculous yield for a single gleaner, enough to sustain them for weeks. When Ruth presented the massive bounty, Naomi was completely astounded. Hearing that Boaz was their benefactor, Naomi's long-dead hope suddenly reignited with a fierce, brilliant spark. She joyfully declared that the Lord had not abandoned the living or the dead. She revealed to Ruth that Boaz was their close relative, a kinsman-redeemer. The goel, or kinsman-redeemer, was a crucial Hebrew legal concept. A wealthy relative could rescue impoverished family members, buy back lost land, or marry a childless widow. Throughout the grueling barley and wheat harvests, Ruth maintained her exhausting rhythm. She worked diligently alongside Boaz's young women, continually demonstrating her unshakable humility and quiet strength. But as the harvest season finally concluded, Naomi recognized a terrifying reality. Daily bread was temporary. Without a husband, Ruth remained dangerously vulnerable in this ancient society. Driven by deep maternal love, Naomi conceived a culturally audacious plan to secure Ruth's permanent rest. It was a calculated risk, requiring immense faith and profound courage. She instructed Ruth to wash, anoint herself with fragrant oils, and put on her finest garments. She was to secretly approach the communal threshing floor that night. Threshing floors were flat, open spaces where harvested grain was winnowed. Landowners often slept there to protect their valuable crops from thieves during the final harvest celebrations. Naomi told Ruth to wait until Boaz fell asleep, then quietly uncover his feet and lie down. This sounds strange to modern ears, but carried deep meaning. It was not an illicit seduction, but a highly symbolic legal gesture. By lying at his feet, Ruth was humbly submitting to his authority and requesting protection. She was essentially asking him to spread his protective garment over her, an ancient Near Eastern idiom signifying formal marriage and the assumption of covenantal family responsibilities. Displaying absolute trust in Naomi's wisdom, Ruth agreed without hesitation. She risked her reputation, boldly stepping into the darkness to execute this dangerous, profoundly vulnerable midnight strategy. That night, Boaz ate and drank, his heart merry with the successful harvest. He eventually lay down in the deep shadows at the edge of the grain. Moving with utmost silence, Ruth carefully executed the plan. She gently uncovered his feet and laid down, waiting in the freezing midnight air for his inevitable awakening. Startled by the sudden chill at midnight, Boaz awoke and rolled over. In the darkness, he was utterly shocked to discover a woman lying quietly at his feet. He demanded to know her identity. With astonishing courage, Ruth identified herself and boldly asked him to spread his wings over his servant, acting as her redeemer. Boaz was deeply moved by her noble character. He praised her, recognizing that she had chosen familial loyalty over pursuing younger, wealthier men for her own pleasure. He called her a woman of noble character. This specific Hebrew phrase, eshet chel, perfectly mirrors the famous description of the ideal virtuous woman in Proverbs 31. However, Boaz revealed a devastating legal complication. Although he was entirely willing to fulfill the redeemer role, another closer male relative actually possessed the primary legal right. This unknown man had the first option to purchase Elimelech's ancestral land and marry the Moabite widow. Ancient Israelite jurisprudence required strictly honoring this hierarchical family structure. Boaz swore a solemn oath by the living God. If the closer relative refused his legal obligation, Boaz promised he would proudly step forward and redeem her. To protect her fragile reputation from village gossip, he instructed her to stay until dawn. She then departed before the morning light could reveal her compromising presence. Before Ruth departed in the early dawn, Boaz generously filled her protective cloak with 6 large measures of barley, physically symbolizing his unwavering commitment to provide. Returning to Bethlehem, Ruth eagerly recounted the midnight encounter to her deeply anxious mother Naomi. She proudly presented the massive gift of grain, representing Boaz's solemn, binding promise. Naomi, possessing deep cultural wisdom, recognized Boaz's honorable intentions. She instructed Ruth to wait patiently, knowing this righteous patrician would not rest until securing a legal resolution today. Early that morning, Boaz boldly approached the bustling city gate. In ancient fortified settlements, this expansive architectural threshold served as the official courtroom and civic administration center. Boaz patiently waited until the closer kinsman unexpectedly passed by. He formally summoned the man to sit down, simultaneously assembling 10 respected village elders as official legal witnesses. Boaz skillfully presented the complex legal matter regarding Naomi's ancestral property. He publicly offered the kinsman the exclusive first right to redeem the valuable estate of deceased Elimelech. Hearing this lucrative financial proposition, the unnamed man immediately agreed. Acquiring fertile agricultural land would significantly expand his own estate and elevate his local socio-economic standing within Judah. Then, Boaz brilliantly revealed the mandatory secondary condition. Purchasing the property legally required marrying Ruth, the impoverished Moabite widow, to actively perpetuate the deceased family's ancestral lineage. Confronted with marrying a marginalized foreigner, the kinsman quickly recoiled. He feared this controversial union would financially endanger his inheritance and socially complicate his existing Israelite family structure. He publicly surrendered his legal right of redemption to Boaz. To legally ratify this binding decision, they performed an ancient, highly symbolic, Near Eastern contractual ritual involving footwear. The closer relative removed his leather sandal and handed it directly to Boaz. In ancient Israelite jurisprudence, this physical transfer officially finalized the irrevocable exchange of property rights. Holding the sandal before the gathered elders, Boaz made a historic public declaration. He officially announced his purchase of Naomi's property and his formal marriage to Ruth. He proclaimed this noble union would permanently preserve the dead man's sacred legacy. It ensured the ancestral family name would never be erased from the historic tribal registry. The witnesses erupted into joyous, prophetic blessings. They boldly prayed that this marginalized Moabite woman would build up the house of Israel just like the revered matriarchs. Boaz honorably took Ruth into his wealthy household, making her his beloved wife. The Lord graciously blessed their faithful union, and she miraculously conceived a healthy baby boy. The village women celebrated Naomi's profound restoration. They joyfully proclaimed that God had mercifully provided a redeemer to nourish her shattered soul during her fragile twilight years. They declared that her exceptionally devoted daughter was vastly better than 7 sons. This was the ultimate cultural compliment in an intensely patriarchal ancient Near Eastern agricultural society. Naomi tenderly took the newborn child, placing him upon her lap as his nurse. The rejoicing community officially named the boy Obed, which beautifully translates to faithful servant. Obed would eventually grow into a prominent Israelite patriarch. He became the father of Jesse, who subsequently fathered David, establishing the most glorious royal dynasty in biblical history. Through the courageous faith of a despised Moabite foreigner, the sacred royal bloodline was miraculously preserved. God masterfully wove her tragic story into the grand narrative of salvation. Ruth's extraordinary journey powerfully demonstrates that true faith demands courageous, sacrificial action. She abandoned everything familiar, radically trusting an unseen God to guide her safely through terrifying territory. Boaz brilliantly models the profound integrity of true righteousness. He consistently used his immense socio-economic privilege to fiercely protect the vulnerable, perfectly blending divine justice with radical compassion. Naomi's agonizing transformation from bitter despair to overwhelming joy reveals a profound truth. The Almighty can meticulously orchestrate redemption even amidst our darkest, most painful seasons of staggering loss. Ultimately, this ancient agricultural romance points directly toward a far greater salvation. Boaz, the faithful kinsman-redeemer, perfectly foreshadows Jesus Christ, the ultimate Savior of a desperate, broken humanity. Christ redeems us not with ancient silver or agricultural land, but through His ultimate sacrifice. He offers eternal restoration to all who demonstrate the steadfast, courageous faith of Ruth. If this powerful historical narrative moved your heart today, please consider subscribing now. Support our ongoing mission to illuminate ancient biblical texts through captivating storytelling and accurate research.